All right. So I believe this is the kind of stuff people are really interested in seeing right now. The Lord of the Rings set just dropped, and we're finally getting access to some of the new cards to test out in some of the various shadow builds. And one of the first cards I wanted to try out was Orcish Bowmaster. It's a card that's shown up in not only like a recent challenge winning list, but been showing up a decent bit in some of the leagues. So like Young Dingo played it in Rakdos recently, and it's just a card that uh, a lot of people have created a bit of a buzz about or around in the discords and such. Honestly, I don't think Bowmaster really solves problems that Dimir has, but for the sake of fairness, I want to try the card out, see how it does, and then make judgments after that. I don't want to prematurely say no, it's bad, it's out, I'm never touching it. Like, if you don't get the games in with it, you don't really have too much of a leg to stand on as far as arguments go. So we're going to give it a shot here. Replaced the second copy of the Dress Down and the 2 copies of Shadow of Mortality with it. Whether that's right or wrong, don't know. I just didn't want to replace a lot of the counter magic. So we'll see what happens. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe it's worth trying again. Who really knows? Not me, because I haven't cast the card yet. So, really open to see things like Seasoned Pyromancer with Shadow of Mortality or with Bowmasters. And here we're on a mold of 6. We're on the play. We've got Bowmaster. So, hopefully, this is a good first game for it. We see a Fable of the Mirror Breaker and a Seasoned Pyromancer right away. So, who knows? Maybe we get some Bowmaster gotcha lines. Murktide, a really good follow-up threat. And immediately off the bat, I don't want to say punished for Bowmaster, but this was kind of one of my fears, is that Bowmaster is like really looking for some specific lines, and when those don't open themselves up, things get a little awkward. Um, Not saying that this hand would have been better in the face of Blood Moon if this Bowmaster was like a Shadow of Mortality, but yeah, like I just don't know how much this is going to solve problems that we actively have. So we'll get down Bowmaster because our opponent does have a Spyro and a Fable in hand. So maybe Bowmaster triggers off those. We can get like a big army token, start getting some damage through, and they just find a Fury. Um, huh. Let's go to game 2. Obviously, we can't control our opponent top decking a Blood Moon, but I do think that's kind of a sign of what I'm afraid of with Bowmaster, which here we get it again. So who knows? Maybe it's good this game. Opponent shocking in a Shatter Skull, so assuming like a lightning bolt, something like that. Spreading Seas, the red source. Just trying to find more lands, which thankfully we do. Now we've got counter spells, so okay. We've got something kind of rolling. I'll dress down just to use my mana, get another card draw again. I'm like trying to find lands, bigger threats than Bowmaster, because ultimately, like, Bowmaster has a really good chance of dying to a Fury, a Bolt, what's it called? The Flame Slash. Maze Mind Tome. Um, in hindsight, watching this game back, maybe I should have just counterspelled the Maze Mind Tome, but I was kind of afraid that if I did that, I wouldn't have the ability to fight over the next spell, like one of the big 3 drops. And then here's obviously where we want Bowmaster. Like, hey, our opponent's dashing in a Ragavan. We get to kill it. We get to make 2 bodies. Like, that looks pretty good. Now, the other side of that, and this is why I always want to be objective when testing new cards and going through this process, is yes, Bowmaster looked good at killing a Ragavan there and putting the bodies on board. Did we care about the Ragavan with Dismember Fatal Push in hand? And would this Bowmaster have been better if it were just another Shadow of Mortality, which is what it was before? And my argument is Bowmaster might get across the finish line here. I think it would have been better as a Shadow of Mortality because it was more resilient. I don't think it mattered what Bowmaster was. It just needed to be something with power and toughness. So that's kind of that's where I think a lot of people go awry a bit with examining how cards are testing out. I think they look at Bowmaster right there and say, yeah, Bowmaster was fantastic. Like it killed a dashed Ragavan, it put 2 bodies on board. But you've got to take a step back and say, like, okay, but did that matter? Not really. All right, so double Maze Mind Tome. A little unfortunate. And then obviously having this drown in the lock while opponents not putting much into their graveyard. Also a little unfortunate. But maybe we flash in this Borrower. We have the chance of getting basic islands if our opponent plays like Blood Moon. So kill off a Spyro. Just trying to find like a Murktide, a Shadow. Can't find a Shadow of Mortality because those aren't in the deck. But obviously, if we had a Bowmaster in response to that Spyro, it would have been pretty cool. If we were to add another one, the 4th one, it would probably be over the 3rd Stubborn Denial. Since Bowmaster doesn't really do a good job of enabling Stub. The good old fetch in response to the Bolt. Fury's pretty solid, but we'll go ahead and fight over that. If I had had another way to lose life, like a Street Wraith, then I would have just gone for that instead of the Drown, but I need to keep this Shadow alive. Even though we're staring down a Blast Zone and double Maze Mind Tome's about to come off. Good old Blood Moon. Making a very, very conservative attack for being at 20 life with the possibility of going up to 24. I think they could have been a little more aggressive there. We're just out here trying to get some chip damage. I was also really hoping that Bowmaster would be like do something against Maze Mind Tome. But as we noticed, like our opponent never drew a card off of Maze Mind Tome. They just scryed 4 times or 8 times. So Bowmaster wouldn't have even looked good against it. And then there was kind of a punt for not playing out the land. I honestly wasn't thinking about Unholy Heat. I was thinking like, oh, my 5/5 Shadow is safe. Was not the case. So Ragavan. Ragavan off Arid Mesa Mountain means I'm really not sure what this is. If it was Murktide, you would expect a blue fetch and a mountain. If it was Scam, you'd expect a black fetch. So it looks like just some sort of maybe Boros Stoneblade-esque deck. All So we've been drowned. We could have kept that, but I don't think it's like too big of a deal either way. Rag hitting in, and they get the thought seize on us, plus the ranger captain. So we're in a pretty rough spot. Kind of one draw step to find a relevant threat. Why they're not attacking with the ranger captain, I have no idea. I'm guessing it's another situation of like, hey, I don't want to make your shadows even bigger, but you're sitting there staring down a fetch land. All right, Bowmaster into Ragavan again. Winota. I did not have this pegged for a Winota deck. So that's, I guess, kind of cool. Giver of Runes. I don't know how good that is in your Winota deck, but we'll see. We get to go to game 2. Board out, like Stubborn Denials are absolutely atrocious. Some of the more aggressive stuff like Street Wraith. Like we want to get Shadow down, but we need to get Shadow down in like a little more controlling manner. Thoughtseize, we get to rip Athalia. So now we're just really hoping for the second land and we can start kind of tempoing out with these counter spells. We see Eowyn, which, if you haven't seen this card before, it's a 3/4 for 4. So same cost as Winota. And it's got the ability, it's a haster, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile an opponent's creature that has greater power than it. So if they played it out right now, it wouldn't exile the shadow because the shadow's power is the same. But now it would. Uh, However, with cards like this, you need to recognize that it interacts very unfavorably for them with Dismember on our side because abilities like that trigger when they go on the stack, and then when they resolve, they check the power and toughness, everything, and use the last known information. So Dismember would reduce the power and toughness to 0, and it would say, okay, your card is bigger than a 0, it would die. But because we're Death Shadow, we have a much more fun interaction where if our opponent casts an Eowyn, targets our shadow, we can pay 2 life, go up to or go down to 6, make shadow 7/7, target our own shadow with Dismember. The Dismember resolves, drops shadow down to a 2/2. Now Eowyn's ability resolves and it sees, hey, Shadow's not at higher life total than this Eowyn. You're a liar. How dare you? Eowyn triggers fizzles. We go to our turn, untap, Shadow goes back to a 7/7. So cool little line to keep in mind. We can do the same thing with Murktide here by like paying 2 life, giving our Murktide -5/-5. Uh, and then instead they play Shadowfax, which attacks and puts in a creature with less power than Shadowfax, so they would get to attack, put in an Eowyn for free. But because we're mean old stinky poopy heads and we play Dismember, we're just gonna kill the Shadowfax and not worry about all those fancy triggers because we just want to untap and present lethal. All right, so Fatal Push our Ragavan. Opponent not having like a follow up Thalia is really nice here, but we would still get to like Thoughtseize through it, so it's not the end of the world. I just know we want to kind of aggressively use some of these counter spells because I want to be able to like untap, Thoughtseize, hold up another counter spell or whatever the case may be. Take a Spyro, leave our opponent with only Winota. So if we can fight that, then we can untap, drop a reasonably sized Murktide Regent, which does a really nice job of flying over Seasoned Pyromancer tokens. So we give our opponent like this one draw step to find something relevant. And if they don't, then we're just going to fly over with the Murktide a bunch of times. Turok was just because I wanted to get something on the battlefield. dress down in response to Thalia because I don't really want to waste a counter spell on Thalia and leave myself roughed up by something worse. But if I drop down a dress down there, then I know they can't follow up with like an impactful 3-drop, like another Spyro, and get triggers off of it. So I just like buy myself through their turn. All right, so this is round 3, I believe, up against Mill. All right, kill some crabs. One of the really good things about playing like Murktide and all this, not only is it fantastic against Mill in situations like this, but it makes it so that cards like Tasha's Hideous Laughter are significantly worse against us than they are against other variations of Shadow, like Grix's Shadow. Because with 4 copies of Street Wraith, 3 copies of Murktide, Shadow of Mortality, there's a reasonable chance our opponent's going to hit some of those, and we just kind of get to laugh our way to untapping as we flip over 7 cards or whatever. Now, that doesn't mean we're just going to let them resolve if we have the opportunity to stop them, but it does mean that you are a lot safer on turns that you want to like tap out to get a big threat down. Because now it becomes, oh, the worst thing they can do is play Jace, and you can attack back into it. But if they just play like a Tasha's, then it's not some absolute wrecking. I think I should have just gone for the Scalding Tarn here, so that if my opponent played I could go ahead and fetch on my turn. If they played an Archive Trap, I'd just Flusterstorm it, move on to turn 2. But instead, my opponent does a good job of playing around Drown by playing the second crab, going for the fetch land that way. So, although Murktide is online, Murktide staring down double crab is pretty rough. Especially with Bowmaster, like, not actually killing anything. And this is what I'm kind of worried about with Bowmaster is the trigger's cool, but the trigger is absolutely not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. And when it's not triggering, it is just 2 1/1 bodies. It isn't like some crazy checkmate card. All right. I got a little cheeky here because I was really hoping that my opponent would miss their land drop and they'd go for Field of Ruin, and I could respond with like Drown in the Lock to kill a crab, go get a basic island. I'd mill over 3, but I'd have another Drown in the Lock active, so I could counter like a follow up spell to the Field of Ruin. But since my opponent just drew another land, like we're dead to the crab triggers. But I figured my out was, since they had 2 more cards in hand, was trying to play to them having to Field of Ruin and not playing to them having another land drop. Also, sideboarding against Mill, Street Wraiths. I usually trim on them. I don't always cut all of them because they're good against Tasha's. And it's also really important to not just like give up your entire primary game plan. Like, you don't want to just give up on having good shadows just because Street Wraith is a little awkward. But having Murktide in the deck is kind of like, I don't want to say a cheat code in the matchup, but pretty solid. Here we'll just sit on stub. I can tank a bunch of mills off of a Hedron Crab. And then they are on a very, very short clock with an 8/8 Murktide flying at them. Sit back on our counter spell in case we see something scarier, which we do not. So on to match number 4. Okay hand on the play. Obviously, the Street Wraith finding us another land is way better. So now we have access to getting down like our turn 2 shadow if we need to. I don't know what we're up against, but I'm pretty happy to play out a shadow here. Because if it is like a Ren and 6 deck, we have the ability to stub a Ren. If it's a Bolt deck, we can soft stub a Bolt and then untap, and they can't Ren down tick. Um, Looks like Living End with the new Oliphant card, probably the new Int that gets a land as well. But I figure with double shadow, I kind of have the ability to get a board presence going. Hopefully, soft stub a. No, hoping I could soft stub a Living End, but unfortunately, with our opponent dropping a Grief there and Stubborn Denial being the only worthwhile target, it's a pretty easy take on their part. So we'll go to game 2. Can't even kill one of our own shadows to get it back, so that's kind of rough. But really good hand against Living End for game 2 here. Even with the Ley Line of Sanctity, we just have like Consider to help getting our or help hit our land drops. We've got Shadow. We've got our boy Turok that we can just play out here as a threat, or just play out this Murktide. Doesn't really matter. All we really care about is hitting one more land. Turok really good at whenever they cycle, um, getting those extra counters, so it builds up that way. Could play a Shadow, hold up Flusterstorm. But I don't think the Shadow not changing the clock means like I'm a little less interested in that one. And then as soon as they cycle here, we know game's probably over because either they go for a main phase Living End on their turn, or they pass the turn and go for a Violent Outburst on ours, in which case they can't beat Flusterstorm. So pretty okay with that. And I think I just like fire off Counterspell here for the sake of getting a Force Negation out of hand. So I know without a shadow of a doubt that Flusterstorm's going to end the game. Could just go for the Flusterstorm. Like, I know they can't pay for all the copies, even with like multiple Force of Negations. So it's kind of whatever. This is also one of the matchups that I wanted to see Bowmaster against because their deck does contain a lot of things that say cycle. Unfortunately, with the new cycle cards, these land cyclers, since they don't draw a card, they don't trigger Bowmaster. So do have to be careful of that. I had like this main phase opportunity to get you my opponent as they cycled an Architects of Will and then missed the land drop. Do want to point out here that these Bowmasters would be at least some number of Shadow of Mortality instead of the Bowmaster. So right now I would be countering this. I would have done 3 less damage, so they'd be at 10. I'd be countering this, untapping. I would have shocked there, shocked in Hallowed Fountain, played down a Shadow of Mortality, and had access to Drown in the Lock right here. So we would be passing the turn with Drown up. They go for Shardless. We drown that. And so, yeah, we would have been like pretty similar position. But I do really think it's worth pointing out that one of the cards that, or one of the decks that draws the most with all the cyclers now has 4 to 8 to 12 main deck copies of things that no longer say draw a card. So keep that in mind. Breeding Pool Island makes me think it might be back to back Living End. So kind of want to just play out the Bowmaster. Not Living End. Growth Spiral. I have no idea what plays Growth Spiral in 2023, but my immediate thought is like Wilderness Reclamation. And if that's the case, I should have played the Consider before the Shadow because I would have been really happy finding a Thoughtseize. Like, I don't really need more Drowning Locks because I'm not really interacting with much. Obviously, I would have loved to interact with a Bolt, but that's okay because I do just have Murktide coming down. Counterspell on the Murktide, which we get to fight over. And now we're just hoping that opponent doesn't do anything too scary, like play a One Ring. If you saw the target there on the Bowmaster, the turn the ring comes down, since they get protection from everything, we can't shoot them with the Bowmaster if they draw immediately. So that was kind of funny to see. Now, with our opponent drawing 2 here, we do get to trigger a couple Bowmaster pings. So this is looking pretty solid for our friendly neighborhood orc. Especially if our opponent's going to play 2023 modern staple Cryptic Command. Why they didn't Cryptic Command on our upkeep, I don't know. But obviously we'll take it. Sideboarding against Wilderness Reclamation, treating it like a lot of the unfair matchups, like spot removals definitely coming out. Extra counter spells like Flusterstorm are coming in, Turok's coming in. No Renin 6 on turn 2 is really nice. And then we'll fire off this Thoughtseize because we have the Flusterstorm backup. I didn't want to fire it off on turn 1 because if they had Veil of Summer, we'd just be like walking into it for no reason. Now, if they have Spell Pierce and Veil of Summer, so be it. Looks like they do not. So we get to take the ring, leave them with a Cryptic Command and a bunch of lands. So maybe we can drop down some number of shadows, see what happens. Opponent very kindly going down to 4 cards and going up to 4 cards in the graveyard. And then very unkindly playing a One Ring. So Spreading Seas the Rogren Triome in case they have like Prismatic Ending to Fairy, something like that. I really don't want to deal with those cards if I can avoid it. Said they're going to bounce our Murktide. So now we're just never going to tap off of counter magic again. And this is where it's really nice to play this like tempo style of gameplay with Shadow. Since I know they have, or they use that Cryptic Command, but since I know they have Cryptic Commands, I'm kind of okay going for that, that Petty Theft into turn, because if they fight over that and I fight back, I just get to untap with all my mana. So it's more just a matter of being somewhat mana efficient. And yeah, that's the league. So thoughts on Orcish Bowmaster? I think it's rough when a lot of the card advantage spells in Modern, and I've mentioned this on stream once or twice, a lot of the card advantage spells in Modern don't actually say draw a card. So, like, Expressive Iteration just says put 1 in exile, put 1 into your hand. Renin 6 just says pick up a land, put it into your hand. Risen Reef says put it into your hand. Cards like Dress Down don't trigger Bowmaster because it loses the ability before you draw. What else? Bunch of stuff like that. It's just really tough to evaluate a card that needs a specific requirement And especially when decks like Living End are losing a bunch of the cyclers that actually draw, it I'm just not sure there's enough opportunities for Bowmaster to like do anything relevant. I feel like a lot of the times it's just going to be 2 mana, ping your opponent for 1, make 2/1/1s. And if that's the case, it's not good. Like Dragon Fodder is already an unplayable modern card, and if the ceiling for Bowmaster in a lot of matchups is an instant speed Dragon Fodder, a raise the alarm, then man, that does not look good. Obviously, I'm going to try it out more because we did end up 3-2 despite the Bowmasters. However, the only matchup that Bowmaster looked good, like actually good, not just, oh, this was a body, but better than other things, was in that final matchup against uh, Wilderness Reclamation in the ring. And that's a matchup that we should be like 85% in anyway. So Bowmaster did not improve a matchup that we were already good against. But I would have exponentially preferred Bowmaster to be a Shadow of Mortality in that round 1 against Mono Red. So keep that in mind as you're trying out the card. Like, don't just look at, is Bowmaster doing something that's somewhat playable? Look at whether Bowmaster is actually improving something that you had problems with. Be objective about your testing with it. So hopefully this video helps out as you're getting ready to try out some of these new Lord of the Rings cards. As always, if you're enjoying the commentary, enjoying the content, feel free to drop a sub down below. Really helps to promote the channel, and as we're on the road to 1,000 subs, it's great to see the numbers climb. Otherwise, have a link to the deck list below, the Discord channel, the Twitter in case you want to know when live streams are happening, and the Twitch channel itself in case you ever want to come hang out. So other than that, hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch you back live later. Adios for now.